first thing that we're going to look at today would be combining like terms. One will be with whole number, decimal, and then fractions. If we're looking at combining like terms with whole number coefficients, we could look at 5c minus c. Always look at your sign of operation. We have a subtraction sign. Then you're going to ask yourself, how many terms do you have? Terms are separated by addition and subtraction signs. So I could look and identify 5c as one term, and then I have the other c as a second term. Since they both have c's, they would be considered like terms. They have the same last name. They have the same variable. So we would look at the 5c, and we would subtract the c, and we'd need to ask ourselves, what would the coefficient be for the c that's standing alone? Well, what would you multiply the c by in order for it to keep its value? Well, it would be 1. 1 times c would keep its value of c. The identity property tells us that. Now that we have our like terms, we can subtract, and we have 5 c's. We are subtracting 1c, and we would have a total of 4c, and that would be the answer for this particular problem. Next, we're going to look at decimal coefficients. The only difference with this is you're going to have to still rewrite your problem and make sure you do so. Make sure you have the sign of operation right. And so I have 8.8a, and I'm subtracting 4.9a. This might be a good time to get your junk column going so that any work that you do, you can just do to the side of your paper so you don't mess up everything in between. I'm going to identify my two terms. I've got 8.8a. I've got 4.9a. Again, check your sign of operation. It's subtraction. Yes, they do have the same last name of a, so I can subtract. What's very important to remember is when you add or subtract decimals, you always line up the decimals. Just like money, you line up the decimal. And so we have our sign of operation as subtraction. We know that the same last name is a. We could go ahead and borrow, and then 18 less 9 would give us our 9. And then when we take 4 from 7, we have 3. And our answer would be 3.9a. That would be the difference. Next, we're going to do something a little bit more complicated. Again, I'm going to go ahead and have my junk column just so I can do any calculations. And the difference with something like this is when you take a look at the problem, we have 2/3 v, and we are adding 1/4 v. Again, sign of operation is addition. I'm going to take a look, and I have two terms. One of my terms is 2/3 v. The other is 1/4 v. They are like terms because they do have the same last name. However, we know if we add or subtract fractions, we now need to find a common denominator. And in order to find your common denominator, we really need to find the least common multiple. Now, I taught the students how to do this on their calculators, but most students knew that the least common multiple, which then in turn will be used as the least common denominator, is going to be a 12. Now, at this point, when we know that we have our common denominator, it's a good idea to set up your fractions, and you have your 2/3, and of course you have your v, and you have 1/4 and a v. We are putting an equal sign because we are looking for an equivalent fraction that uses the 12, which is our common denominator, for both fractions. And then it's going to be a v because they are like terms. We need to ask ourselves, what do I need to multiply 2/3 by? What do I multiply 2/3 by in order to get to a denominator of 12? Well, it's going to be 4, and whatever I use in my denominator, I put in my numerator. We have 3 times 4 will give us our 12. 2 times 4 will give us 8. So an equivalent fraction for 2/3 v is going to be 8/12 v. Next, we do the same thing with our second fraction, and we ask ourselves, what do I need to multiply my 4 by to get to 12? And it would be 3. Therefore, it would be 3/3. 4 times 3 with the v would be 12v. 1 times 3 would give us our 3. This would be an equivalent fraction for 1/4 v. Notice that we have 4 over 4, which equals 1, 3 over 3, which equals 1. Anytime we multiply any number by 1, we keep its value. That's the identity property. So by multiplying 2/3 v by 1, we are still getting 2/3 v. The numbers look different, but the value is the same. And the same holds true with your second fraction. Now we're able to add because we have a common denominator. And so if I have 8/12 v and I add 3/12 v, I would have a total of 11/12 v. And that would be my sum. And that's it.